and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm your host, Chris Stafford, and this is Season 2, Episode 4. On this month's episode, we feature two recipients of Oak Spring's Eliza Moore Fellowship for Artistic Excellence. Joining us shortly in conversation will be Ariana Benson, a Southern Black poet from Norfolk, Virginia, and Ashia Ajani, a storyteller and environmental educator from Denver, Colorado, unceded territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people. Both writers will explore themes related to the American landscape through the lens of their experiences as Black artists, and they'll share insights into their creative processes. But first, we have a new segment, and joining me to explain that is the Director of Programs here at Oak Spring, Danielle Eady. We're going to have this new segment called Continuum, which is what Oak Spring is all about, isn't it, Danielle?
Yes, it is. Thanks, Chris. So this week, I am excited to share more about our Eliza Moore Fellowship for Artistic Excellence. So in this month's episode, we'll be hearing from two awardees of the Eliza Moore Fellowship. This program was set up by our president, Peter Crane. When he first got here in 2016, we were able to award our first Eliza Moore Fellows in 2018, and we have awarded these fellowships every year since then. So now we have over 12 Eliza Moore Fellows who are early career artists working on exciting projects that relate to plants, landscapes, and gardens in some way. So we've hosted painters, we have writers, which will be on the episode today, sculptors, photographers, a whole range of visual artists working on new works that have come through this program. They receive a $10,000 grant, and then they will stay on site for 2 to 5 weeks and join our other interdisciplinary residents and fellows while they're here. So this fellowship was actually named after Mrs. Mellon's daughter, Eliza Moore, who was a painter and sculptor and photographer. She was very influenced by the interplay of light and shadows. She often described the lights that she would see as angels, and a lot of her work was trying to depict and explain these images that would come to her. So we think of this fellowship as an honor of Eliza Moore. Right before Eliza Moore was hospitalized, she was actually tragically hit by a bus in New York. She had actually met with Diane Brown, and they were formulating an organization called RX Art, which now still exists to this day in New York City. And they fund artists to create projects and installations in pediatric hospitals. So they're doing really amazing work. It kind of speaks to the influence and vision that Eliza Moore had. So that's a little bit of background about the fellowship. I'm really excited that we have Ariana and Ashia on today's episode. As I mentioned, they are both poets and creative writers who have received this award. And I think that people will enjoy hearing from them. And I'm excited to continue these new Continuum segments in the coming months. So thanks, and over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Danielle. Yes, well, we're going to be hearing from both those guests in just a moment. So appreciate you bringing that to us. And it gives us a little bit of background. I think the point of this segment is to give us the background to the various things that happen at Oak Spring. And they are varied. They really are extensive. And I think it just educates our listening audience here as to the work that's done and why these fellowships, for example, why they came about, how they came about, and who is benefiting from them, because this is something that's an ongoing fellowship, of course. And again, giving people the background and also explaining why these fellowships were put in place, and also looking ahead to the future as well. So we're looking forward to you coming back every month, Danielle, to bring us this segment of Continuum and telling us more about the background to all the many things that we do here at Oak Spring. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Chris. Looking forward to it too.
And joining us now to share their love of writing and especially poetry are Ariana Benson and Ashia Ajani. Ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Good morning, Ashia.
Good morning, Ariana. It's so great to see you again, to be in conversation again. I think the last time I saw you was, in person with Furious Flower. That was like the first time we got to meet in person.
Yeah, which is Virginia. So I guess we keep doing these things that are connected to Virginia in interesting ways. How have you been since then? Where have your feet found themselves in the world? And what kinds of beauty is inspiring you to write and to think?
Oh my goodness. Already starting off strong. Right now, I mean, I am based in Oakland, California. I've been here for the past few years. For those who aren't familiar, I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, and I came out to the Bay Area a few years ago, kind of ping-ponging in between coasts, but really have felt settled in Oakland, especially because, growing up in Denver, I felt like I had this fantastic mix of city and nature. And oftentimes the boundaries between those two bled into each other very nicely. And I found a very similar type of living in Oakland. I love the urban greenery in Oakland so much. I mean, it's springtime, or spring is it is springtime. We just had the equinox. So it is now officially springtime. And I can officially say that it's spring because, the magnolias, they started to bud, and that's always a really great harbinger of spring here in Oakland, and everything. And the poppies are coming up. The lavender smells amazing. So even just walking around, there's so much beauty to be seen. And I just love how much so many of these urban plants, how resilient they are, and also just how inventive they are with their growth and with their play, and how they interact with each other. And of course, all these little blossoms, the squirrels and the birds, they're teetering around because they know soon there's going to be nice fruit for them, and everything just feels very abundant. And that's even so, just walking, I love walking. And that's I think the thing really that's driving a lot of my inspiration and what I've been doing, and just and what I've been thinking about, especially, as spring comes, I get everybody's super excited for summer. I think because I'm a little bit more involved in climate space. Whenever I hear summer, I start to get a little nervous. So I'm going to enjoy spring for as much as I can. And, I'm really loving the weather and just the energy that spring brings.
I love a couple of things that you said. I love the word abundance. I think that's absolutely spring. I think we somewhat associate the word harvest with fall and autumnal, offerings. But I really think that spring is its own kind of harvest, just in a different way. The color palette is more pastel, but the world becomes just as lush and just as fruitful, if not more, right? And then I also love that you talked about the surprise of spring. I think that's my favorite part of it. Somehow every single year I'm oh my gosh, the world really does get green again. The flowers really do come back. The animals really do come back. And we know this. It's one of the first things they teach you as a kid, right? How the seasons work. And yet every single year that I spend on this planet, I'm still kind of enthralled with this miracle of spring and of the world, right? So no, I think I'm in a similar place, even though we're on opposite coasts. I think I'm in a similar internal space and just kind of appreciating the external beauty of spring. I'm sitting right now in my family home in Southern Virginia, and my neighbors have this beautiful tree, these tiny little bubble white blossoms. I need to look up what it's actually called, but it's beautiful. And there are always a lot of different birds in the neighborhood. When I walk, I constantly am seeing them, and I'm whipping out any app that I can. I'm not quite on birder status yet, but a couple years ago, maybe I noticed that there were more than just your average robin and brown bird and maybe occasional cardinal in the neighborhood. And so I started to get curious, and I got in my Christian Cooper bag, and I was let me actually see what's out here. There's a lot of different things. I've also been doing a lot of walks in which I guess I do the intaking of what we're creating now, which is the podcast. The other day, I was actually listening to a talk or a reading of an essay by Annie Dillard. Do you know Annie Dillard's work at all?
You know, a lot of my friends have recommended her work to me. It feels like very like the universe is calling me to her work. You're like the fourth person who's mentioned her.
So, well, what's interesting is my first encounter with Annie Dillard, I was not a fan. It was in, I think, AP 11th grade English, and we read the essay collection Teaching a Stone to Talk. And I think my 16-year-old self was just very frustrated with these kind of slow, intentionally methodical essays about the eclipse. Or I think there's one about literally she goes up to a mountain to meet a monk, or a man who's living like a monk, who has been spending the majority of his life trying to teach stones to talk. So as like a teenager, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, these essays are so boring. Why am I reading this? But I was walking the other day and I was listening to her read this eclipse essay that I remember I had to write an essay to respond in response to. And I was so much more moved, I guess, by the detail with which she described even the paintings in the hotel, how cliche they were, and what amazing kind of contrast that gave to the just breathless experience of seeing the cliffs, and how these people just, I mean, fell almost to their knees, stumbling down this hill afterwards, like they had literally looked in the face of God. It was incredible. And maybe it also needed her reading of it as well, her voice to it, I think put a lot to the essay. But it was just interesting to think about a decade later, how greatly my experience with that writing had changed. And so from that, I have a couple of questions for you. One, do you have any writers that you have this experience with, or any kind of artistic inspiration where you're like, once upon a time, this did nothing for me, and now, oh my gosh, I can't stop myself from just throwing myself at its feet? And then I guess, what do you imagine your book, Heirloom, Beautiful Collection, might have to say in 10 years that will come off differently than it did when, say, it was published a year or so ago?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such amazing questions. And, I similarly, like as a side anecdote, or like, I guess like a precursor to answering the question, I also remember like sitting like being a teenager and just like, differently when you're a teenager. And you want like, I guess, like the timing of what you're reading to like match up with like the timing of your life. And I remember that like so vividly too, sitting in class, being so frustrated with how slow some of these books were moving. And then now again, like you say, like I return to them like 10, 12 years later, and I am like, wow, yes. I get it now. I think a big one, I mean, I loved it. There's like a lot of books. I'm like a person that if I'm not rocking with the book, like I'm not going to finish it. Like I'm not
Team DNF, Team DNF.
I'm not going to force myself to finish it. I'm not going to like be like, no, I got to like stick it out to the end. If there reaches a point where like, I'm like, oh God, I got to like open up this book again. That is enough to let me know that's like, okay, maybe it's time to let this one go. So it's like interesting, like to think about like evolution, and the person that I think about the most, especially, is Toni Morrison. I read Tar Baby. And this is a book that I teach quite frequently because I teach a class, or I used to teach a class at UC Berkeley called 20th and 21st Century Black Environmental Literature. And I mean, like, when you're thinking about Black environmental literature, Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston. Those are like the two people that like
absolutely
come to mind. So you got to have them on the syllabus. And so I was like trying to like play around with like what book is going to be on the syllabus, because there's so much great Toni. And she's so, and nature as like character, like nature as like setting, really like, the setting is all there is.
Doesn't Sula open with just that description of the bottom? I mean, that incredible. Like, that's like Black nature writing personified.
Black nature writing, like, to a T. And it's so funny because even like, again, and I'm teaching like college students, and usually they're like first years. So, like fresh off of high school, and like they're very young. When I'm like, let's focus on this paragraph, they're like, but it's just like a description. And I'm like, yes, let's get into it. but yeah, like Tar Baby, I first read it when I was in high school, and I liked it, and I was like, it's not my favorite Toni Morrison book. Like, I think there's other ones that I like more. I like Song of Solomon more. I really like Paradise. Like, those would probably be my top two. But I think that there is something really lovely about returning to a text and kind of compelling yourself to return to a text at different stages in your life. Because then I read it again in college, and there is this passage. Sorry, spoiler alert. If anybody out there is
I mean, if you're getting Morrison spoiled, it just means you need to go read.
Exactly. See, you feel me. So there's this passage where this man, this black man, he's sitting in this white. It takes place in the Caribbean. And it's really good. I love teaching this book because it's a really good look at landscape, land use changes, and hierarchies internationally, and also among Blackness. And Toni Morrison does it really expertly in this book. And there's this black man, and he's sitting in this white guy, it's in the Caribbean. He's obviously this settler in the Caribbean. This white guy who's amassed his wealth, and then he's gone to live out his glory days in the Caribbean, as they do, right? And sitting at the table, and he decides to, the white guy, he decides to fire his maids because they take a couple of apples from this big barrel that he had imported. Apples don't grow in the Caribbean. It's very expensive, at this time that, Toni Morrison is writing. And even to this day, certain fruits, it's really expensive to import places. So he fires his maids. And this black guy, this amazing paragraph about how colonizers, the only thing they deal with is in waste. And it's just this long paragraph, how to make waste, how to justify waste, how to make their waste work for them. And they will only be satisfied when they are surrounded by their waste. And I remember reading this, and I just kind of passed over it in high school, and then coming back to it in college, and then coming back to it again, as an educator. Wow, what a amazing, succinct way to talk about environmental racism and colonization and legacies of colonialism just in that paragraph. And, again, there's just certain things that stick out to me. In high school, I'm so obsessed with the love story, right? I'm obsessed with the romance of it. And then you get older and you're dang, the romance. I mean, there's even moments of tension within the romance about class and about expectation and colorism. And she just writes it so expertly, but it's nature that lets this whole story unfold. She does it so well. That's the first question. Can you remind me what the second question was?
Yeah, sure. So I just, I'm just asking us to kind of conjecture into the future. What do you think your book has to say that might be received differently in 10 years, or that you hope will be received differently in 10 years?
Wow. If I had a magic ball. It's funny, because even thinking about Heirloom, we're coming up on 2 years of Heirloom. And even now when I read poems, I return, because it's very a very deeply personal collection, because it's about family and it's about fragmentation and, and migration. I hope especially as my younger cousins get older, I hope that Heirloom is in some ways an inheritance and an heirloom for them, a way for them to remember who, folks who have passed on, folks who they might only have very distant memories of, for them to see that we as Lucases have lived such long lives, and have some record of that. And I think that record, is not just in terms of family photos, but in ways that people are interpreting our history, in ways that, we're thinking through, changes and harm and, removal and fragmentation and how we come back together again, in spite of it. And, the format of the book, it starts in origin, in the South, and then it kind of moves further and further west, and it ends with me ending up in California, where I've chosen to, remain for the time being. And I think that in a lot of ways, Heirloom is grappling with at what point do you stop running? And so I'm curious how that is going to be received like 10 years from now. Thinking about like, it seems like in a lot of ways, I talk to a lot of my friends who are Black or who have family like from the South. A lot of people are like moving back to the South. There used to be like this big push, like, and of course, there's all those legacies of like racial terror and like land grabbing and violence that like compelled us to leave. But now a lot of people are moving back. And, a lot of places are experiencing like a boom in population that's like kind of unprecedented. And so I'm curious, like if this trend continues, how these books that are about like fleeing the South are going to be received as, populations continue to shift and grow.
That's interesting. As someone who is actively moving back to the South and spent the past 2 years in the Midwest, I can kind of speak to my own motivations, which is just, it's very simple. There's just no place like home. And I think even for folks who were not raised in the South, the Great Migration did not sever the cultural experience of home, right? It only changed the location. I mean, because if you talk to someone from Chicago, if you look at the Black folks, I learned so much more about Altadena and that community after the fires, of course. And I'm looking like, these are Southern Black people. They just live in California, right? And so for me, as someone who was born in the kind of North-ish South, I think that the range of it is so much more vast than people realize. It's such a large region of the country. And in that way, there are a lot of kind of places to find yourself. There's a diversity of experience. So you can have an urban Southern experience. You can have a rural Southern experience. You can have what I grew up with, which is something in between, where we have the beach and the swamp and the mountains and the fields, all within like a 30-minute range, right? And so I think it also allows for you to have a kind of comfort in the distinct setting of your living, while also experiencing a cultural belonging for me as a Black person in America that I really, really hold fast to. Like one of my favorite things about, I'm moving to Atlanta here shortly, and one of my favorite things about living in Atlanta is that everywhere you go, it's us. And everywhere you go, we're celebrated, right? And so it's not to absolve the South of its clear ills, especially when it comes to things like underfunding us. When it comes to things like, in Atlanta, destroying the forest, right, for Cop City. It's not to disabuse us of any notion that the South is some kind of, haven for Blackness. But what it is to say that if we're there, we can create a haven, right? And there are those places that are there. So yeah, I love that. I love that you've been thinking about it. I've been dominating the question asking. I think I'll let you take a turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for such thoughtful questions. I am very excited. I think just as an aside, in your move to Atlanta, I have some family out that way. Like we're not from Atlanta, but my uncle has a dance company in East Point, Georgia, called Balethnic. And, he talks about that, like that placemaking. And it's really cool. He thinks about dance and like choreography as like kind of like a fugitive action, as like a way of like, like placemaking, reclaiming body and a really like great form of storytelling. And so, that actually kind of leads me to a question like what other forms of storytelling have like really been compelling you recently? Like, are there books? Is there media? Is there, just what's capturing your interest these days?
I love this question. So to speak briefly to dance, I love that kind of conceptualization of dancing as a fugitive act. And I was a dancer growing up. I did ballet, tap, jazz, lyrical, like all of it. And I do think that the opportunities that I got to engage with kind of any movement that was supposed to be artistic really gave me a distinct kind of self-actualization in a way that I don't know that I gained in any other area until I started writing poetry after college, right? Like when I was dancing, I felt so uniquely and specifically in a world that was for me, a world of body that was for me, and a language that was for me that I couldn't necessarily be be told I was speaking wrong or saying with an accent, right? And so I think I love that, and I just love the title, like ballet ethnic. That's incredible. So I think I would love to look at more dance. Recently, I have been engaging with orchestral music, and that's because a wonderful, brilliant composer, also Atlanta-based, Joel Thompson, took one of the poems in Black Pastoral on Mars and wrote music to it. And it's I think a 4-piece composition. Please, Joel, if you're seeing this, I apologize. I don't know enough about the art, but I know that there are strings, there are piano, and then there's the vocal part, and the lyrics of the poem were sung beautifully in soprano by singer Jamie Barton. She did an amazing job, and so it's just gotten me into this kind of concept of the intersection between poetry or lyric and music, and what magic can be made when those things are brought together. And then even that as an active translation, the way that he was able to, kind of evoke the affective turns, the little joy, right, of, Black boys dunking on the gravityless Mars, and the little sadnesses of, but gosh, I've never really wondered too much about space because I have too much to worry about down here, right? In the song, I'm still so blown away. And so I've been listening to a lot of independent music. I can pull up on my phone. A lot of just composers who are doing some interesting things. I'm subscribed to this really cool newsletter that shares them. So last week it was Yumiko Morioka. And the album that I listened to was Gaiaphilia, which is, so much to do. Of course, Gaia is a goddess of nature. And so it was so much to do with these kind of inspirations by nature sounds. There were bird sounds in the background. And so I'm kind of just letting that wash over me as I write, as I engage. And I'm also really finding myself engaging with visual art and architecture. This is to bring it fully back full circle to Toni Morrison, but I was listening to an interview with I think she's Scottish Ghanaian, yes, architect and novelist, which I'm like, that's awesome. This lady, on top of creating a whole architecture school, being a leader in her field by far, she's also written something like 13 novels. Her name is Leslie Loco. Okay. She's incredible. Talking about, what it has meant to be a Black woman in the field of architecture, the connection between how a building changes a space. And it's made me think a lot about architecture as a function of nature, right? How we build around and into nature, the shapes of the buildings, the way we direct people into them, what we subtract to consider ourselves adding. But then in the interview, Leslie talks about what it was like to be a child with a Ghanaian father and a Scottish mother. And that, she had, because she grew up more in Scotland than she did in Ghana, she had a better kind of understanding of that identity. But when she read Toni Morrison, it was the first time that she had seen an author mention by name Accra and talk about it as a beautiful place and describe it. And Accra was the first city that I ever visited on the continent, right? I got to go when I was a junior in college, and it was amazing. And we did all of the critical, I think, experiential things of going to Cape Coast, going to the door of no return, right? But also we took a dance class on the campus of, we were at University of Accra, right? And we got to experience the food, and we got to learn a bit of a country. And it was an incredible experience. And so it's a place that holds so much special, kind of imagery in my heart. And it was really interesting then to think about how someone whose primary craft is building things that are meant to last, right? Buildings, that's the first kind of principle is this stable? Is coming from a personal experience of duality or kind of instability in an identity way, because she also talked about how she didn't really know herself as Black until she again, was in the UK, going to school in London specifically, actually. And they were like, yeah, because when you grow up in, Accra, you're just Ghanaian, or even for her, her experience as a biracial woman was a bit different there, right? But so how there's an instability of identity or what people will identify you as, juxtaposed with a career in building these very kind of stable structures. And then also where the experience of a storyteller and a novelist comes in and all of that. So yeah, I'm a rabbit hole person. I find artists that I love and I'm just like, I have to know everything about you. And so I've been on a Leslie Loco kick. I think she's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of those recommendations. Oh my gosh, I feel like my mind is buzzing so much. Similarly, I'm very much like a rabbit hole kind of person. And I recently read and I had it. I also they were also at Furious Flower, and that was like my first time meeting them. And I'd encountered their work before, kind of here and there. But I recently read. I feel like I always get the title, I switched some of the words. Ankle Deep in Pacific Water.
Yeah, E. Hughes.
By E. Hughes. And that was. I think that so many Black writers now are writing about like migration and like varietals of experience. And, I love what you said, in terms of like really everything in the U.S., especially every let me not generalize, but like so many iterations of Blackness in the U.S. are extensions of the South. And it's really interesting, to read E. Hughes's work and like think about that like flipped experience of like, just like I grew and also, as someone who grew up in Denver, who grew up in the West, obviously very different than growing up in like between like Oakland and LA, but just reading about, like that sort of so much stuff like, I read about in the West is, again, just such an extension of the South. Like even the ways that we play, the way that we do our hair, like, like the community involvements. But there's just like a slight difference of it, like in geography and like nature like plays such a huge role in that. And, even just hearing about like your experience going to Accra and connecting it to the architect novelist that you were like speaking about. I, for the first time, went to Senegal. I'd never been to West Africa until last year. No, this year. Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting that it's 2025. I'd never been to Senegal. Like I spent like the first week of January in Senegal, in Dakar and Sali Nyakuru, and then we went to Gorée Island. And we went to the House of Slaves. And I just, remember someone had said, I can't remember where it was from, that Africa is the root and the diaspora are the branches. And I thought that was just like so beautiful and so heart-wrenching and so gave me so much to think about in terms of like my own writing, in terms of like who am I writing for, what am I writing towards. And I was just wondering if you could like speak a little bit more about like your engagement, your connection with like the continent, with like West Africa. Like how is that coming up for you in your work, or is it, like coming up for you in your work?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The oldest poem in Black Pastoral is inspired by that trip that I mentioned to Accra. So when they take you to, kind of the door of no return, which is the final place in Elmina Castle, where in this instance, because there are many castles, there are many doors of no return, right? We know this. But at Elmina, this is the specific door where the enslaved were going through onto the ship. So that was their final, time kind of set foot in Africa. But so when they're taking you on the way to the castle, it's a journey, and you actually start in the jungle. And so you're walking through, and you're walking along the Last Bath River, where the enslaved took their last bath. And the tour guide said something about the pineapples on the ground. I had never seen like naturally occurring pineapples. Never thought about how pineapples grow, that they're like little upside down trees. I don't like pineapple, so it had never really occurred to me anyway. I know, hot take. But he told us that they actually used the pineapples to navigate where they were. And so they were kind of like constellations in the ground, right? They would keep track of the formations and they would know where they were. And I thought that that was fascinating. And then years later, when I was living in London, I was constantly seeing these pineapples on things like kind of in a gargoyle sconce fashion, like on the edge of banisters and on the tops of buildings. And so I started to do research and learned how coveted the pineapple was in the kind of early days of monarchy in England, because you can't grow pineapples in England. There's not enough sun. It's not warm enough. And so it was a very coveted import to the degree that, you know, the people of high rank would have a pineapple in their house on display for dinner, and they're not eating it. They're just showing, like, this is a show of wealth. Okay, they're flexing the pineapple like this. And I thought that the juxtaposition between that was really interesting. To use the material of something in one case as a kind of guiding North Star, which for me is the history of diaspora, is the existence of the enslaved in itself. And then in another context entirely, the existence of the enslaved or having slaves in similar fashion to having a pineapple is a money flex. And so that inspired, you know, that specific poem to Villanelle in that book, in the book, because I love this idea of the refrain, this idea of that these symbols keep reappearing in different places, these images and these textures that keep coming back in so many different ways. So I wrote about that. And I've also since been to Marrakesh. That was a really amazing opportunity. It was a Black Writers Retreat. And my favorite experience, I think, was just going to the market and seeing how everyone was just kind of interacting with each other, how families were walking around. We went to specifically a baker, and they told us about how families, as a kind of like ritual of marriage and connection, would put their initials into a loaf of bread and then have it delivered to another family as a kind of offering. And I thought that was really interesting. It's often coming back to food in these specific instances, which I think is another, I mean, beautiful aspect of the branch of diaspora, right, that we can trace back. So those are where things have been. Those are kind of two central locations for me. And then I think just hoping to travel more in these next couple of years. You know, when you're rooted down by school, it's a little bit more difficult. Right. And now I'm free. And so I hope to return to the continent. I really would like to go to South Africa and just do more exploring.
Yeah.
Okay. But so I think now it's the time to turn to our poem. So we'll briefly tell you, viewing audience, what we're going to be reading from. It's this gorgeous anthology, a new eco-poetry anthology attached to the living world. We just received our copies, each of us, this week, and discovered that we both have a poem in it, edited by Anne Fisherworth and Laura Grace Street, available at Trinity University Press. Featuring work by many poets that have personally inspired me, including Vivi Francis, who is actually my first non-academic workshop leader, and that's where I met E. Hughes. I think that was both of our first poetry workshop, actually. So Vivi, Ross Gay, Natasha Trethaway, Amy Nazuka Matado, all folks that I'd say write beautifully about land, about nature, about its histories. And so we're going to read each of us one of the other's poems. Ashia, would you do the honor of going first?
Absolutely. And, you know, even speaking about motif, I'm going to be reading Love Poem in the Black Field by Ariana Benson. Chesapeake, Virginia, 1891. Listen, I did not mean to come to you empty-handed, to be yet another who only takes. My father taught me better than to milk dry what I cherish. I meant to bring you my fist full of wildflowers, buttercups and loosestrife, aster and thistle wild as wind. I paid the man at the riverbank, his cedarwood cart splintered by the brackish spray. his nail bed stained a deep blue that fades like shoreline into tan. I bought you a lush posy to hold while we watch schooners troll the swamp. But darling, I've been an owned thing. I've been the orphan calf baying, been the birth, damp hay cut and baled a few days before. I know we keep livestock for meat and hides, hens for their eggs, but is beauty enough reason to claim what once lived unpossessed? Please understand, I had to put them back in the dirt. I plucked their seeds with my teeth, spat them along the trail, felt each one crush under the stone of my heel as I walked here to you. I know I must sound mad. I hope I'm the kind of mad that makes you feel most whole. Think how, when we're sun-pruned and weary, we'll stroll here among the wayward blossoms. How right to love in a field of our own making.
Oh, you brought so much to that poem. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for writing.
I am going to read Mint by Ashia and Ajani. Mint. Grandma played me her garden song during the shallow heat of springtime. She beat her palms against the soil, caressed the dirt-laced scrapes on my knees. Jewels of transcontinental sweat lined her bosom as she hacked up furtive weeds. Granny licked her peeling sugarcane lips. They parted, and forth sprung an aria of flowers. There were whole land masses dropping from her hands, breathing soul into fragrant coriander and parsley, ballads of San Juan and Mississippi, West Africa, reconciled in Sunday dew-kissed grass. Look how the slender spines of lilac bow to the sunflower's sullen crowns just yards away. A squash blossom swan song wanes towards summer. She sat in the cool shade, mint leaves whistling, her back creaking like slave ships on salted ocean. She's found ways to harvest her own skin. Ripe like wild bananas, slow and deliberate.
So beautiful. Thank you, Ariana.
Ladies, that was absolutely delightful.
Thank you.
And so beautifully read, the poem. So I really appreciate you taking time to choose a poem of the others to read and take this time to do the podcast with us. It really was a joy to have you on the show this week. So I think that's it for the podcast. But I do want to remind everybody that we now have a YouTube channel that is taking some, not only the podcast, the video podcast, so you're able to watch the podcast as well, but also we're going to record now some bonus content, something that maybe we didn't have time to record on the show. So if you follow Oak Spring on YouTube, you can go over there and see some extra time with these two ladies who are our guests this month and enjoy some bonus content that we didn't have time for here on the show. But for the podcast, thank you both very much indeed for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And finally, before I sign off this month, the Oak Spring staff here, of course, is very busy at this time of year, preparing for the Spring Open Days in partnership with Virginia Historic Garden Week. During these ticketed tours, guests are able to take a self-guided tour through the Little Oak Spring portion of the estate and experience the gardens and landscapes of Mrs. Mellon. Our next open day will be Friday, June 27th and Saturday, June 28th. Tickets for the Spring Open Days are available on our website at osgf.org/one-day-events. My thanks again to our guests this month, Ariana Benson and Ashia Ajani. Don't forget to check out our website for details of other programs here at Oak Spring, as well as signing up for our newsletter, or you can do that directly by dropping us a line to program@osgf.org. You'll also find us on social media. On Instagram, we're at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. On Twitter, at Oak_Spring. On Facebook, at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. And don't forget the bonus content that you'll find on our YouTube channel, where you'll find the conversation between Ariana and Ashia continuing there on YouTube for a little bonus content. And there's, of course, lots more videos from Oak Spring at the YouTube channel. Just look for Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'll be back next month when I'll be joined by Christine Harris, the director of Oak Spring's Biocultural Conservation Farm, and Jason Myers-Benner, home-scale farmer and plant and chicken breeder. And their topic will be Farmers Today, so I do hope you'll join me then.